The staircase appeared overnight between the laundry room and the fire exit. No construction, no warning, no record it had ever been built. Everyone noticed it, but no one questioned why it felt familiar. The moment someone stepped onto it, the building began remembering things they had tried to forget.
Welcome to Horror Audiobook.
There is a staircase in this building that does not belong to the architecture, the blueprints, or reality itself. It does not lead downward, it leads inward. Every resident who steps onto it finds something waiting that was never meant to be seen again. A memory, a regret, a moment that never healed. This is not a story about a haunted place. It's about what happens when the mind finally opens the door it has been holding shut. Chapter 1. This staircase was never on the blueprints. The apartment building on Mercer Street had learned how to disappear without leaving. It stood 8 stories tall, a slab of concrete and brick stained by decades of rain, soot, and neglect. Its windows were mismatched, some replaced, some cracked, some permanently dark. The lobby smelled faintly of damp carpet, old paper, and something metallic that no one could ever quite name. The kind of building people moved into when they were between lives, or when life had quietly narrowed its options. It was not a place where strange things happened. That was its most important quality. The residents were ordinary in the way exhaustion makes people ordinary. A retired schoolteacher on the 3rd floor who fed pigeons from her fire escape. A couple on the 6th who argued softly, as if afraid the walls were listening. A night shift security guard who slept through most afternoons and never learned his neighbors' names. The building absorbed them all without comment, holding their routines, their footsteps, their silences. And then one morning, the staircase appeared. It was first noticed by Mrs. Calder, returning from the basement laundry room with a basket pressed to her hip. She stopped halfway down the corridor, staring at the space between the fire exit and the maintenance closet. Her eyes narrowed, not in fear, but confusion, the deep, unsettled kind that comes when something familiar shifts by a fraction of an inch. There was a stairwell there now. Not a door, not a sign, a staircase. Concrete steps descended into shadow, clean-edged and unmarked, with a metal handrail cool to the touch. No dust, no construction debris, no smell of fresh paint. It looked as though it had always been there and had merely waited to be noticed. Mrs. Calder stood very still for a long time. "It wasn't there yesterday," she whispered, though no one was around to hear it. By noon, 5 other residents had said the same sentence. It wasn't there yesterday. They gathered in small, awkward clusters, pretending coincidence had drawn them together. People pointed, people frowned. Phones came out, cameras raised, then lowered again. Somehow the staircase looked wrong through a screen flattened, unreal, like a prop waiting to be assembled. Maintenance was called. The super arrived with his ring of keys and his permanently irritated expression. He walked the corridor twice, tapping the wall beside the stairs, running a palm along the railing. He checked the maintenance closet, the fire exit, the electrical panel. "There's nothing here," he said finally, gesturing to empty air. The residents stared at him. "The stairs," someone said. "What stairs?" The silence that followed was heavier than shouting would have been. Mrs. Calder felt it settle behind her eyes, a pressure like a forming headache. The staircase was still there, solid, undeniable, but the super walked straight past it, his shoulder passing through the space where the railing should have been. No one laughed, no one screamed. They simply watched. By evening, records had been checked, old blueprints pulled from city archives, fire inspection reports, renovation permits. The building had always had 2 stairwells and 1 fire exit on that floor, nothing more. Yet every resident could see it now. The staircase did not flicker. It did not shimmer. It cast a shadow that bent slightly to the left, no matter the angle of the lights. The air around it felt cooler, faintly damp like the breath of an underground space. No one stepped onto it that first day. They passed it carefully, like an unfamiliar animal that might bite if startled. Conversations grew quieter. Doors closed more quickly. A woman on the fifth floor dreamed of falling and woke with her hands clenched, nails digging into her palms. That night the building settled into its usual sounds, pipes ticking, distant sirens, the hum of old wiring. But beneath it all, something new threaded through the silence. A low, almost inaudible echo, like footsteps far below. By morning, the staircase had not vanished. Instead, it felt closer. People swore the opening was wider, the shadows deeper, the air heavier, thick with the smell of cold stone and something faintly sweet beneath it, like old paper left too long in a damp room. Mrs. Calder returned to the corridor with her laundry again, though she couldn't have explained why she chose that time. She stood at the edge of the first step, peering down. The darkness did not behave as it should. It did not flatten or blur. It layered itself, depth upon depth, as if the stairs extended far beyond the building's foundation. She felt a strange sensation then, not fear, not yet, but recognition. The staircase felt personal. She stepped back quickly, heart racing, and laughed under her breath at herself. Old age, imagination, stress. She told herself she would mention it to her doctor. Behind her, a door opened. Was it there yesterday? A man asked, his voice too casual. Mrs. Calder turned. He was new. She was certain of it. She knew every face on her floor, every pattern of movement, every rhythm of presence. This man looked like someone who had always lived there and had only just decided to be noticed. Yes, she said slowly, I think it was. He nodded, eyes fixed on the staircase. That's funny, he replied. I'm sure it was. They stood together in the corridor, listening. From below, something shifted, stone against stone, a sound like a careful breath being taken. Neither of them spoke again, because both of them were thinking the same thing. It wasn't there yesterday, and whatever had built it had waited a very long time to be remembered. Chapter 2. Everyone felt the pull, no one admitted it. By the third day, the staircase had become part of the building's routine. Not accepted, never that, but accommodated, the way people learn to live around a persistent ache. Residents stepped wider around it, slowed their pace as they passed, pretended to check their phones or rummage through bags so they wouldn't have to look directly into the dark descending space. The building adjusted, too. Footsteps echoed a little longer in the corridor. The lights above the staircase flickered more often than the others, as if unsure how brightly they were meant to shine. No one spoke about the feeling, but everyone felt it. It began as a pressure behind the sternum, a gentle insistence rather than a demand. Curiosity braided tightly with dread, the way it did when a half-remembered dream brushed against waking thought. The staircase felt familiar, not because it had been seen before, but because something inside each person recognized it. Like hearing your name spoken softly in a crowd and knowing, without turning, that it was meant for you. Mrs. Calder noticed it first in herself. She began finding excuses to pass the corridor more often. A forgotten letter to mail, a trash bag that could wait until morning but didn't. She would pause at the far end, telling herself she was only catching her breath, only resting her hip against the wall. Minutes would pass, sometimes more. When she finally returned to her apartment, she couldn't remember what she had been thinking about while she stood there. Others followed the same pattern. The man from 5B started taking the stairs instead of the elevator, even though it made his knee ache. A young woman on the 7th floor began walking her dog at odd hours, always looping past the stairwell. The night shift security guard, who had never cared much for the building at all, started lingering during his rounds, flashlight lowered, eyes unfocused. They never spoke to each other about it. When they did exchange glances in the hallway, there was a flicker of something like embarrassment. as if acknowledging the pull would make it stronger, as if saying it aloud would be an invitation. The staircase, for its part, remained patient. It did not change shape. It did not reach out. It simply waited, descending into itself, step after step after step. The air around it stayed cool, carrying that same faint smell, old stone, damp paper, something sweet and decayed beneath. At night the pull sharpened. Sleep came unevenly. Dreams grew vivid, crowded with places half-remembered and voices just out of reach. More than one resident woke with the sensation of having missed an appointment or failed to show up for something important. They lay in the dark, hearts racing, convinced that somewhere below them, something was still waiting. The building did not help. Pipes knocked in unfamiliar rhythms. The elevator paused too long between floors. Once, the lights went out across the entire floor for exactly 30 seconds, long enough for someone to swear they heard a hand slide along the railing of the staircase. In the morning there were no footprints, no signs of movement. Only the feeling, stronger now. You don't choose the staircase. It chooses when you're ready. The phrase appeared without origin, settling into the minds of the residents like a shared thought. No one could have said where they'd heard it first. Some assumed it came from a conversation they'd half overheard. Others thought it had been printed somewhere, maybe on a notice they'd forgotten to read. But it felt true. Small changes accumulated. Conversations grew more strained, as if people were listening for something else while they spoke. Meals were skipped. Time slipped. A woman on the fourth floor stood in front of her bathroom mirror for nearly an hour one evening, unable to remember why she had gone there in the first place. When she finally noticed the clock, she laughed shakily and told herself she needed more sleep. Down the hall, the staircase listened. One evening, a storm rolled in, slow, heavy rain tapping against the windows, thunder muted by distance. The hallway lights dimmed, brightened, then steadied. Mrs. Calder found herself outside her apartment again, robe pulled tight around her, slippers whispering against the carpet. She hadn't decided to go there. She stood at the edge of the first step, closer than she ever had before. The darkness below seemed deeper tonight, layered and deliberate. She could almost imagine shapes in it, not moving, not yet, but waiting in the way a held breath waits. Her heart hammered, her hands trembled. "This is ridiculous," she murmured, the words thin and unconvincing. Behind her, the hallway creaked. She turned, expecting to see another resident, another shared look of unease. Instead, the corridor stretched empty in both directions. The lights hummed softly. The building held still. For a moment, a terrible, intimate moment, she felt certain that if she stepped down, the staircase would recognize her, that it would open itself in response, the way a lock yields to the correct key. You don't choose the staircase. It chooses when you're ready. Mrs. Calder stepped back, breath coming too fast, and hurried to her apartment. She locked the door, then checked it twice more for good measure. Only when she sat on her bed did she realize her hands were still shaking. Elsewhere in the building, others stood at the same threshold, telling themselves the same lies, that they were only curious, that they would never actually go down, that whatever this was, it could be ignored. The staircase remained, and deep within it something shifted, subtle, anticipatory, as if it had just counted one more name on a list. Chapter 3. The first step changes what you remember. The first person to go down was not the one anyone expected. It was Elias Morin from 3C, a thin, soft-spoken man who worked records at the municipal courthouse and apologized when other people bumped into him. He had lived in the building for 6 years without incident, without friendship, without complaint. If asked, most residents would have said they barely remembered him at all, which made it harder later to agree on what he had been like before. It happened on a Tuesday evening, the kind that passed unnoticed. Rain smeared the windows into dull mirrors. The elevator was broken again. Mrs. Calder heard footsteps in the hallway and assumed nothing of it until she noticed how slowly they moved, one careful placement after another, as if someone were testing unfamiliar ground. By the time she opened her door, Elias was already halfway down the staircase. He did not look frightened. That was the part people struggled with later. His shoulders were relaxed, his hand rested lightly on the railing. He moved as though following instructions he trusted. Mrs. Calder called his name once, then again, her voice rising. He did not turn. The darkness swallowed him step by step, soundlessly. No echo, no shift of air, just the steady disappearance of a man who had never drawn attention in his life. No one followed him. They waited. Minutes passed, then longer stretches that felt like minutes. The hallway lights flickered once and steadied. Somewhere below, a sound like distant movement, stone adjusting to weight, rolled upward and faded. When Elias returned, it was nearly an hour later. He emerged without warning, one foot on the last step, then the next, as if he had always been there and had simply paused. His face was pale, his eyes unfocused, his mouth set in a line too tight to be natural. Mrs. Calder touched his arm. He flinched. "I'm fine," he said quickly, too quickly. "I just took a wrong turn." The words landed wrong. The staircase had no turns. Others gathered, drawn by instinct and something closer to relief. Elias stood among them, breathing shallowly, nodding at questions he did not answer. When someone asked what was down there, he opened his mouth and stopped. A strange expression crossed his face, not fear, not confusion. Revision. "I don't remember," he said finally. "I mean, I remember it differently now." The phrase settled over them, heavy and unfinished. They escorted him back to his apartment. Someone offered water. Someone else joked thinly about secret basements and old buildings. Elias smiled when he was expected to smile. He thanked them. He locked his door. That night no one slept well. By morning, the distortions had begun. Elias showed up late for work, something he had never done before. At the courthouse, he misfiled documents, corrected himself, then insisted the errors had always been there. When a colleague mentioned a case they'd worked together last year, he frowned and said he had never been assigned to it. "That's not how I remember it," he said, irritation bleeding through his calm. "I remember it differently now." The phrase repeated itself, attaching to new moments like a reflex. In the building, similar fractures appeared. Mrs. Calder found a photograph tucked into a book she swore she had never owned. It showed her younger, standing beside a man whose face she could not bring into focus no matter how long she stared. Her chest tightened with a grief she could not place. The man from 5B argued with his partner about a vacation neither of them could agree had happened. The young woman on the 7th floor cried in the stairwell for reasons she couldn't articulate, wiping her eyes and laughing at herself afterward. "I don't know why that upset me," she said. "I remember it differently now." The staircase remained unchanged. If anything, it seemed quieter, satisfied. The air around it no longer felt merely cool, but attentive, as though it had been listening for the right adjustment and had finally found it. Elias avoided the hallway. When he couldn't, he passed quickly, eyes fixed ahead. He began covering his mirrors at night. He stopped answering his phone. Once Mrs. Calder heard him arguing with someone through the wall, his voice low, urgent. "No," he said, "that's not how it happened, that's not how it happened." There was no reply. Days passed. Memory became unreliable currency. Residents began second-guessing themselves, then second-guessing the second guesses. Arguments sparked over trivial things, who had said what, who had promised which favor. Emotional reactions bloomed without roots, anger without cause, sorrow without origin. The staircase did not need to pull as hard now. It had proof. One evening, Elias stood before it again. Mrs. Calder watched from her doorway, heart pounding. He did not step down. He simply stood, staring into the dark, his face slack with something like longing. "I think it gave me something," he said suddenly, not looking at her. "Gave you what?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "I don't know, or I do, but it doesn't fit anymore, like a memory that won't stay where it belongs." He took a breath. For a moment, Mrs. Calder was certain he would step forward. Instead, he turned away. That night, she dreamed of staircases layered inside staircases, each leading to a room where someone waited, patient and unfinished. When she woke, her heart was racing, and one thought pressed against the inside of her skull, fully formed and utterly che-u-je-de. I remember it differently now. Down the hall, the staircase waited. And somewhere within its depths, something rearranged itself, preparing for the next step. Chapter 4. The staircase learns you as you descend. The second descent happened quietly. No gathering, no witnesses lingering in the corridor, just a single door opening in the early hours of morning when the building's noises softened and the city outside seemed far away. The woman from the seventh floor, Lena Ortiz, stepped into the hallway with her coat still buttoned wrong, her hair damp from a shower she did not remember finishing. She did not look surprised to see the staircase. That later would trouble her neighbors more than anything else. Lena stood at the edge of the first step and waited, listening. The hallway behind her felt distant, thin, like a set painted too close to the wall. Ahead, the darkness below the stairs was not empty. It had texture, depth, a sense of attention. She took the first step. The sound it made was wrong, not the sharp echo of concrete, but something softer, absorbent, as if the stair had accepted her weight rather than resisted it. The air cooled immediately, carrying a smell that tugged at her chest, dust and old ink and the faint, coppery note of rain-soaked earth. As she descended, the staircase changed. Not abruptly, not enough to provoke panic, just enough to be noticed after the fact. The walls narrowed by a fraction. The railing warmed beneath her palm. The rhythm of her footsteps shifted, slowing to match her breathing. She felt a prickle of unease and almost laughed. "This is stupid," she murmured. Her voice did not echo. Instead, it seemed to settle into the space, absorbed like moisture into stone. The second flight curved slightly to the left. Lena frowned. She had not noticed a curve from above. The light, where was it coming from, dimmed and brightened in pulses like a distant heartbeat. With each step, memories rose unbidden. Not images at first, sensations. The pressure of a crowded bus, the weight of a hand on her shoulder, too familiar, too lingering, the smell of antiseptic and burnt coffee. Her throat tightened. She told herself these were stress responses, the brain filling silence with noise. The staircase did not disagree. The walls grew closer, not enough to touch, but enough to be felt. The ceiling lowered just slightly, encouraging her to tilt her head. The sound of her steps changed again, hollow now, as if the space ahead were opening wider even as the corridor constricted. Lena stopped. The darkness ahead deepened, resolving into something like a landing. She sensed, without seeing, that the staircase was waiting for her to continue, not impatiently, expectantly. Her heart pounded. It knew what I hadn't said out loud, she thought, and the certainty of it made her dizzy. She descended again. On the next flight, the air warmed. The smell changed, cheap perfume, stale smoke. Her pulse spiked as a memory sharpened into focus. A narrow apartment, laughter edged with cruelty, the sound of a door locking behind her. Her hand brushed the wall and the texture shifted beneath her fingers, smooth concrete giving way to peeling paint. "No," she whispered. The staircase listened. A sound drifted up from below, not a voice, not quite, but the suggestion of one, the cadence of speech without words. Lena felt an urge to respond, to explain, to justify. Her mouth opened. The sound stopped. The staircase narrowed further. Panic flared, sharp and sudden. She stumbled, catching herself on the railing which pulsed faintly beneath her grip. Her breath came fast, fogging the air in front of her face. For a moment, only a moment, she thought she felt a hand close around her wrist. She jerked back. There was nothing there. The staircase relented. The walls eased apart. The pressure in her chest loosened. A sense of relief washed through her, disproportionate and almost euphoric. She laughed weakly, wiping her eyes. "I'm fine," she said to no one. Below, the landing opened into a room. Not a room in the architectural sense, no corners, no doors, but a space defined by memory. The floor sloped gently downward, and the walls were lined with things Lena recognized without understanding how. A chipped mug she had thrown away years ago, a jacket she had lost, a stack of notebooks she had sworn she burned. At the center of the space was a mirror. She approached it slowly. Her reflection looked like her, mostly. The posture was wrong, too rigid, the eyes too attentive. When she raised her hand, the reflection followed a beat too late. "You don't get to keep all of it," the reflection said softly. Lena staggered back. The staircase behind her shifted. She felt it rearranging, mapping her reactions, testing the edges of her fear. She understood then, not fully but enough, that this place was not trying to hurt her. It was trying to fit. The return was faster. She did not remember climbing, only the sensation of being guided upward, buoyed by a careful pressure at her back. When she emerged into the hallway, the lights hummed, too bright, too loud. The staircase behind her looked unchanged. Lena leaned against the wall, gasping. A neighbor found her there minutes later, sitting on the carpet, laughing and crying at the same time. "I don't know where I went," she said, wiping her face. "But it knew me. It knew what I hadn't said out loud." In the days that followed, Lena avoided mirrors. She avoided narrow spaces. She avoided conversations that drifted too close to the past. When she did speak, her words came out rearranged, emotions misaligned. "That's not how it felt," she snapped once, then faltered. "I mean, I remember it differently now." Others noticed changes, too. The staircase began to respond. When the man from 5B lingered near it, the air grew thick and oppressive, pressing down on his chest. When Mrs. Calder passed, the light softened, casting a gentler glow that made her eyes sting with tears she refused to shed. It was learning. And with every descent, it became more precise. Late one night, as rain tapped softly at the windows, the staircase creaked, not with weight but with anticipation. Somewhere in the building, another door opened, and the staircase adjusted itself, just a little, ready to learn someone new. Chapter 5. Every floor is a buried moment. After the third descent, the residents began to understand the pattern, though none of them would have called it that. They spoke in fragments, in hesitations, in sentences that trailed off as if someone had gently taken the ending away. But beneath the half-formed explanations, a shared realization pressed against their thoughts. The staircase was not endless. It was layered. Each level was a stopping point. Each floor was a memory, not recalled so much as unearthed. The man from 5B, Daniel, though few used his name, went down on a Thursday evening when the rain refused to stop. He told himself he was only going to look, only to stand on the first landing and prove to himself that nothing waited there that he couldn't handle. He returned with mud on his shoes and blood beneath one fingernail. When his partner demanded to know what had happened, Daniel stared at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. "I don't think," he said slowly, "I don't think this is how it ended, was it?" He could not explain where the blood came from. Only that, on the second level, he had been standing in a narrow kitchen that smelled of onions and heat, watching himself raise his voice, watching his hands move in a way he had never admitted they could. The staircase had not accused him. It had simply shown him the moment he stepped away from, polished clean of excuses. Others followed. Not all at once, not dramatically. They went down the way people visit graves, alone, quietly, pretending they were finished with the past. They emerged altered in ways that resisted easy language. Mrs. Calder descended on a morning bright enough to feel cruel. The first level opened into a room that smelled of starch and chalk dust. Desks stood in careful rows. Sunlight cut through tall windows. She recognized the place immediately, though she had not thought of it in decades. A classroom. Her classroom. She stood at the front, younger, straighter, her voice sharper. A student sat in the back row, head bowed, hands shaking. Mrs. Calder watched herself turn away, choosing order over kindness, control over mercy. "I didn't know," she whispered. The staircase did not respond. On the next level, grief waited. A hospital corridor stretched out beneath buzzing lights. The smell of antiseptic burned her nose. She saw herself standing still while a doctor spoke words she had learned never to repeat. She remembered leaving without looking back. This wasn't how it ended, was it? She asked the empty air. The memory did not change. When she returned to the hallway above, her eyes were dry. Her posture was smaller. She did not speak to anyone for 2 days. Lena described her floors in the language of touch. Shame was cold tile beneath bare feet. Abandonment was a room that stayed empty no matter how long she waited. Violence was the sound of her own breathing, too loud, too fast, filling every corner. Each level rearranged itself around the memory it held. The walls adjusted. The light shifted. Sound softened or sharpened to draw attention to the moment that mattered, the exact second when something broke and was never repaired. No one reached the bottom. No one agreed on how many levels there were. Elias stopped descending after the 4th floor. He told Mrs. Calder it was because the staircase had started repeating itself, scenes overlapping, details changing just enough to keep him uncertain. He described watching himself make different choices and feeling the consequences stack, heavy and indistinct. "I don't know which one is real anymore," he said. "I don't know which one I'm supposed to regret." His hands shook when he spoke. His eyes tracked movements that weren't there. Memory distortions intensified. Residents argued over shared histories that no longer aligned. Old apologies resurfaced without context. Laughter arrived late, hollowed out. People began to phrase their sentences carefully, as if precision might protect them. It didn't. The staircase was not interested in truth as comfort, only truth as exposure. It did not show the past as it had been remembered. It showed it as it had been avoided. On one floor, a man relived a fight that ended with a door slammed and never reopened. On another, a woman stood in a quiet nursery and understood, with sudden clarity, why she had never tried again. On another still, someone felt the heat of rage flare and die, leaving behind the long, patient aftermath. "This wasn't how it ended, was it?" became a shared refrain, whispered into walls, murmured into cups of untouched coffee. Sometimes the staircase offered mercy. A descent would end early. A memory would blur before reaching its sharpest edge. Relief would bloom, brief and intoxicating. That was when the danger deepened. Because the residents began to hope. They began to believe that if they could endure enough, if they could confront the right floor, the right moment, the staircase might finish with them. That it might give them closure or forgiveness or something close enough to feel like both. The building shifted around this belief. Hallways felt longer, doors closed more softly. The air carried the faint, persistent scent of damp stone no matter where you stood. The staircase creaked at odd hours, not with footsteps but with adjustment, as if adding new levels. Late one night, Mrs. Calder woke with a certainty so sharp it brought her upright in bed. She knew, without understanding how, that there was another floor waiting for her, one she had never admitted existed, one she had not yet earned the right to see. Her heart pounded, her mouth tasted of dust. Down the hall, the staircase waited in the dark, patient and precise. And somewhere below the levels already revealed, something prepared the next buried moment, ready to ask once again. This wasn't how it ended, was it? Chapter 6. Some people never came back the same. By the time the staircase claimed its fifth descent, the building had stopped pretending this was temporary. The changes were no longer subtle. They no longer hid in phrasing or posture or the careful avoidance of mirrors. Whatever the staircase took, it did not always return in full, and the absences it left behind began to show. Daniel from 5B stopped arguing. At first his partner welcomed the quiet. No more sudden flares of anger, no more sharp words tossed like broken glass. Daniel listened now. He nodded. He agreed. He smiled when expected. But the smile never reached his eyes. He sat for long stretches on the couch, hands folded, gaze fixed on nothing. When asked what he was thinking about, he hesitated, as if searching for the correct response in a room that had been emptied. "I left something down there," he said once softly. "What?" his partner asked. Daniel shook his head. "I don't know, I just know it's gone." Others exhibited different fractures. Lena became restless, packing the hallways at night, fingers brushing the walls as if checking for seams. She spoke too quickly, laughed at the wrong moments, then apologized when no offense had been given. Her dreams bled into waking life, memories surfacing without warning, detached from emotion, like photographs found in a stranger's drawer. Elias grew obsessed. He filled notebooks with diagrams of the staircase as he remembered it, angles that didn't align, measurements that contradicted themselves. He interviewed other residents, asking precise questions, growing agitated when their answers failed to match his own. "That's not how it felt," he snapped more than once. "That's not where it was." Mrs. Calder noticed that he never asked what they had seen, only how it had changed them. Confessions began to surface. Not dramatic ones, not shouted or tearful. They slipped out during mundane moments, offered without expectation of forgiveness. "I used to pretend I didn't hear him crying," someone said in the laundry room, folding sheets with meticulous care. "I told myself it wasn't my responsibility," another admitted in the elevator, staring at the floor numbers as they passed. No one responded. There was no comfort to give. The words were not requests, they were facts, newly unearthed and laid carefully on the table. The staircase did not compel these confessions. It merely made silence harder to maintain. One afternoon, the retired security guard, Thomas, returned from a descent no one had noticed him take. He stood in the hallway, blinking as if the light were too bright, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Calder approached him slowly. "Are you all right?" she asked. Thomas laughed, a short, surprised sound. "I think so. I think I finally met myself." She waited. "It showed me who I would have been," he continued, voice steady but distant. "If nothing had happened, if I hadn't made that choice." He swallowed. He was kinder, quieter, he slept better. Mrs. Calder felt a chill crawl up her spine. "And you?" she asked. Thomas looked at the staircase. "I came back instead." After that, he stopped sleeping altogether. The building responded to these fractures. The staircase's presence grew heavier, more pronounced. Its shadows deepened, stretching further into the corridor. The smell of damp stone lingered even inside apartments, clinging to fabric and skin. Doors closed more often now. Conversations ended abruptly. The residents moved around one another with the careful courtesy of people who had seen too much. And still, some continued to descend. Because not everyone came back broken. A woman on the second floor returned calmer than she had ever been. Her hand stopped shaking. Her voice softened. She smiled with a gentleness that unsettled those who remembered her before. "It took my anger," she said simply when asked. I didn't need it anymore. No one asked what had replaced it. Others were not so fortunate. A man disappeared for 3 days. When he returned, he stood in the hallway staring at the staircase, tears streaming down his face without sound. I left something down there, he repeated over and over, rocking slightly. I left something down there. No one could persuade him to move. Eventually, the lights flickered, and he seemed to wake from a trance. He shuffled back to his apartment, shoulders hunched, as if bracing against an invisible weight. Mrs. Calder began to understand the rule the staircase followed. It did not punish. It did not reward. It rebalanced. Whatever it showed, whatever it took, was precise, measured. It removed excess where it found it, stripped away defenses that had outlived their usefulness. The problem was that people rarely agreed on what parts of themselves were expendable. One night, as the city outside settled into uneasy sleep, the staircase creaked, not with steps but with something like adjustment. The sound traveled through the building, subtle but unmistakable, like furniture being rearranged in the dark. Mrs. Calder sat awake in her bed, hands folded in her lap. She thought of the classroom, the hospital corridor, the floors she had already seen, and the ones she hadn't. Down the hall, the staircase waited, heavier now, fuller, holding pieces of the people who had trusted it. Pieces it had not returned. And as the building breathed around it, one truth became unavoidable. Not everyone who went down was meant to come back whole. Chapter 7. The building begins to shift. The first sign was a door that no one remembered unlocking. It appeared across from the stairwell one morning, flush with the wall, painted the same tired beige as the rest of the corridor. No number, no peephole, just a narrow seam and a brass handle dulled by age. Residents paused before it, frowning, keys half raised, trying to place it within the map of the floor they had carried for years. It hadn't been there yesterday. But when Mrs. Calder traced the wall with her fingers, she found no break in the paint, no scar of recent work. The door felt old, older than the building somehow, its wood cool and faintly damp beneath her palm. She stepped back, unsettled. Down the hall, the staircase breathed. Changes multiplied quickly after that. The staircase grew longer. Not visibly, not all at once, but residents began to notice that it took more steps to reach the first landing than it used to. The descent stretched, the rhythm altered. People counted without meaning to and came up short or over, unable to reconcile the numbers. Ilya swore the angle had changed. Lena insisted the handrail curved, where it never had before. They argued, then stopped, realizing the arguments no longer mattered. The building itself was no longer fixed. Apartments shifted in small, precise ways. A bathroom door opened to the left instead of the right. A closet extended deeper than expected, swallowing boxes and sound. Windows framed different slices of the city, as if the building had rotated slightly in the night. When residents complained, when they tried to complain, their words tangled. They found themselves describing emotions instead of measurements. "It feels wrong," someone said, gesturing helplessly at a wall. "That corner is anxious," another muttered, then flushed, embarrassed. The building listened. It began responding to what was felt, not where people stood. When anger flared, lights flickered. When grief settled heavy and quiet, the hallways lengthened, stretching the distance between doors. When fear spiked, ceilings seemed to lower, pressing down with a gentle, inexorable weight. Mrs. Calder noticed it first in herself. On mornings when she woke with the ache of memory lodged behind her ribs, the corridor outside her apartment felt narrower, the air thicker. On days when she managed, briefly, to feel something like acceptance, the building eased around her, doors opening more smoothly, floors steady beneath her feet. "The building is listening," she whispered one evening, the realization chilling and undeniable. The phrase spread. Residents said it under their breath as a warning, as an explanation, as an apology. The building is listening. The new doors did not open. Not at first. They stood silently, handles cool and expectant, appearing where there had once been blank wall. No one claimed them. No one admitted to curiosity. Yet people lingered near them, hands hovering, hearts racing for reasons they could not name. At night, the building rearranged itself. Hours passed, though outside, the night stayed the same. Footsteps echoed where no one walked. Walls creaked, not with age, but with intention. The staircase shifted its weight, adding distance, adding depth. Mrs. Calder lay awake, counting the seconds between sounds, certain she could feel the structure adjusting around her. As if learning a new language. Elias became convinced the building was mapping them. It's not random, he insisted, packing his apartment, notebooks scattered across every surface. It's aligning, matching interior states to exterior form. You mean it's haunted, Lena said flatly. No, Elias replied, eyes bright with something close to fear. I mean it's responsive. The distinction did not comfort anyone. One afternoon, Daniel from 5B walked into his living room and found it rearranged. The couch faced a wall instead of the window. The television sat unplugged, its screen dark. A door, another new one, stood open where the bookshelf had been. Beyond it lay a narrow room, empty except for a single chair. Daniel stared at it for a long time. I'm not going in there, he said aloud, voice steady. The chair scraped softly against the floor. He backed away slowly, heart hammering. By evening, the room was gone. So was Daniel's numbness. He wept in the hallway, sudden and violent, sobs tearing from him without warning. Neighbors gathered, helpless. As his grief spilled out, the building responded. Lights dimmed, sounds softened, the staircase stilled. The building is listening. That night a storm rolled in. Rain hammered the roof. Thunder shook the windows. Inside, the building flexed and sighed, beams groaning like joints long unused. Mrs. Calder ventured into the corridor. The hallway ended abruptly at a cracked door she did not recognize. Beyond it, darkness pressed close, heavy with the smell of damp stone and old paper. The staircase loomed larger now, its descent steeper, its shadows layered thickly. She felt it then, unmistakably. Attention. The building was not just listening. It was anticipating. Mrs. Calder turned away, heart racing, and hurried back to her apartment. She locked the door, then rested her forehead against it, breathing hard. Somewhere below, the staircase creaked, a slow, deliberate sound. As if stretching. As if preparing. By morning, another apartment was missing. No damage, no debris, just a blank stretch of wall where a door had been. The residents stood before it in stunned silence, each of them certain, absolutely certain, that something had been there before. They didn't argue. They didn't speculate. They understood. The building was shifting to accommodate what they carried. And with every adjustment, every listening wall and lengthening stair, one truth settled in like dust. The building was no longer a place they lived. It was a place that was learning them. And it was not finished yet. Chapter 8. You can go down together, but you return alone. The idea came from fear, pretending to be logic. If the staircase responded to individuals, if it learned them, reshaped itself around their memories and fractures, then perhaps going down together would dilute its power. Perhaps shared presence would anchor them. Witnesses. Proof. It sounded reasonable. That was how dangerous ideas often began. They chose a morning when the building felt momentarily still. The storm clouds had thinned. The lights were steady. The staircase waited, longer now than it had ever been, its shadows layered like folded fabric. 4 residents stood at the threshold. Mrs. Calder, Elias, Lena, and Thomas, the former security guard who no longer slept. They did not speak much. Words felt fragile in that corridor, easily overheard. Instead, they nodded to one another, an agreement formed without ceremony. Together, they stepped onto the staircase. The first few steps felt almost normal. Their footsteps overlapped, shoes scuffing softly against concrete. The railing was cool beneath their hands. Mrs. Calder even allowed herself a small, foolish sense of relief. Then the staircase adjusted. The sound changed first. Footsteps began to echo out of sync, each set slightly delayed as if the space were stretching time itself. The walls drifted apart, then subtly narrowed again, not uniformly but in uneven pulses. Lena glanced sideways. Elias was right beside her. Yet his outline blurred at the edges, like an image seen through fogged glass. "Are you still there?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. His voice came from somewhere behind her. They descended further. The air thickened, heavy with layered smells, dust, metal, old paper, antiseptic. Each breath tasted different. Mrs. Calder felt her chest tighten, a familiar ache blooming as a memory stirred. She turned to Thomas, meaning to ground herself in his presence. He was gone. Panic flared. She spun, heart racing, and found him again, only a step away, head bowed, expression distant. Relief surged, sharp and fleeting. "Don't separate," Elias said, though his voice wavered. The staircase did not care. The next landing fractured the illusion completely. The space opened wider, then split, not physically, not in any way that could be mapped, but perceptually. Mrs. Calder felt the others fade, not vanish, but withdraw, as if the staircase were dimming them one by one. She could hear breathing. She could sense movement. She could not see anyone. The walls shifted, closing in. The light warmed, then cooled. The smell of chalk dust and sunlight filled her nose, and she knew dreadfully where she was. "No," she whispered. Behind her, someone spoke. "I'm here," Lena said. But Lena's voice echoed from too far away. Mrs. Calder reached out and touched only wall. They descended together. They arrived alone. Each resident entered their own space, shaped with intimate precision. For Mrs. Calder, the classroom returned, but this time the desks were filled. Faces turned toward her, expectant, silent. At the back of the room, the student she had failed stood and waited. "This wasn't how it ended," Mrs. Calder whispered. The memory did not respond. Elsewhere, Lena stood in a narrow apartment that breathed with her panic. The walls pulsed. The air smelled of cheap perfume and fear. A door loomed ahead, its handle warm beneath her fingers. She screamed for the others. No one answered. Elias found himself surrounded by versions of the staircase itself, overlapping diagrams, angles folding inward, steps leading nowhere. His notebooks littered the floor, their pages blank. "You wanted to understand," a voice said, not accusing, merely observant. "So we removed the noise." Thomas stood in a room with no walls at all. Just space, open, quiet. In front of him stood another version of himself, unscarred, unbent, eyes clear. The man he might have been. They regarded one another in silence. "You came back," the other Thomas said. "Yes," Thomas replied hoarsely. The staircase observed them all. It did not rush. It did not confuse. It isolated with surgical care, sealing each person inside the truth they could not share. When they returned, it was not together. Mrs. Calder emerged first. Collapsing onto the hallway carpet, breath tearing from her chest. Her eyes were wide, unfocused. Lena followed minutes later, hands shaking, laughter bubbling up and breaking into sobs without warning. Elias appeared next, pale and furious, muttering to himself, tearing pages from a notebook that no longer existed. Thomas was last. He stepped onto the final stair, paused and looked back, though there was nothing to see. The hallway lights flickered, then steadied. They gathered in the corridor, 4 figures who had gone down side by side and come back strangers to one another. "What did you see?" Lena asked, voice trembling. No one answered, because none of them could. They tried later, over coffee gone cold, over hours that stretched thin. They described fragments, metaphors, impressions. None of it aligned. "That's not what happened," Elias snapped more than once. "That's not how it felt," Mrs. Calder insisted, tears in her eyes. Thomas said nothing at all. Finally, Lena laughed weakly and shook her head. "No one else saw what I saw," she said. The phrase settled heavily between them. They understood then, the rule they had hoped to break. The staircase did not deal in shared trauma. It individualized it. Whatever it revealed could not be witnessed, corroborated, or eased by another's presence. There would be no validation, no collective reckoning. Only isolated truths, returned to isolated minds. That night the building was very quiet. Hours passed, though outside, the night stayed the same. Mrs. Calder lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her heart still racing. She knew, without doubt, that there were things she had seen that no one else ever would. Down the hall the staircase creaked softly, a sound like careful satisfaction. It had learned something new. Even together, they were always alone. Chapter 9. The staircase doesn't end, it replaces you. The realization came too late. It surfaced not as panic but as clarity, the most dangerous kind. A thought so precise it cut through fear and settled, cold and undeniable, in the center of the mind. The staircase was not showing them their memories. It was editing them. Elias was the first to say it out loud. He stood in the hallway at dawn, eyes sunken, hair uncombed, clutching one of his notebooks like a life raft. Mrs. Calder watched him pace, his steps erratic, as if the floor beneath him no longer aligned with his internal sense of balance. "It's not retrieval," he said, voice hoarse. "It's revision." No one interrupted. "When we go down," he continued, "we think we're confronting the past, but that's not what's happening. The staircase isn't interested in what happened. It's interested in what remains." Lena crossed her arms tightly. "You're saying it's lying." "No," Elias said. "I'm saying it's deciding." They began to notice it everywhere after that. Memories didn't just surface, they shifted. Emotional weight detached from events that had once defined them. Anger dulled, grief flattened. Joy felt distant, theoretical, like a story heard secondhand. Daniel from 5B was the clearest example. He had gone down again. No one had seen him do it. He simply appeared one afternoon in the hallway, freshly showered, neatly dressed, expression serene in a way that did not belong to him. "I feel better," he said when someone asked. And it was true. He smiled easily. He spoke gently. He apologized when there was no need. He slept through the night for the first time in years. But when Mrs. Calder asked him about his childhood, about the brother he used to mention in passing, Daniel frowned. "I don't have a brother," he said. She stared at him. "Yes, you do," she insisted. "You told me." "No," Daniel replied calmly. "I'm sure I would remember that." Later, alone in her apartment, Mrs. Calder tried to recall the brother herself. She couldn't. The staircase did not remove memories cleanly. It redistributed them. Ownership blurred, emotional context dissolved. What remained were facts without feeling, reactions without origin. People spoke about their lives as if recounting events that had happened to someone else. "I don't know why that used to matter," Lena said one night, staring at her hands. "I remember it happening, I just don't feel it anymore." Thomas understood first. He had always been observant, quiet. He noticed absences where others noticed pain. One evening he stood with Mrs. Calder in the corridor, both of them avoiding the staircase without quite acknowledging it. "It showed me the version of myself without the damage," he said slowly. But I don't think that was the gift. What was? She asked. It was the comparison, Thomas replied. It wanted me to see how replaceable I am. The building creaked softly, as if in agreement. Those who descended too far began to hollow. Not physically, not obviously. They moved through the building with ease, even grace, but their reactions lagged. Their eyes tracked conversations instead of participating in them. When confronted with reminders of who they had been, they smiled politely, unconvinced. I don't know which version of me came back, Lena confessed one morning, her voice barely above a whisper. She had gone down again. No one had tried to stop her. The staircase had learned restraint. It no longer pulled, it invited. Each descent went deeper, not in distance but in consequence. Fewer levels, longer stays, returns that felt less like returns and more like substitutions. Elias became frantic. He spread his notebooks across the hallway floor, pages covered in frantic scrawls. It's iterative, he muttered. Each descent refines the output, strips inconsistency, removes contradiction. Removes people, Mrs. Calder said. Yes, Elias whispered, exactly. One night, Elias did not come back. The building did not react. No alarms, no sounds, just a quiet adjustment like a breath released. By morning, his apartment door was gone, the wall behind it seamless, unmarked. Lena stared at the space where he had lived. I remember him, she said slowly. But even as she spoke, the certainty wavered. Daniel passed them in the hallway, smiling. Do you need help with something? He asked kindly. Lena looked at him and felt nothing. Not anger, not fear. Nothing at all. That was when Mrs. Calder understood the final rule. The staircase did not trap bodies. It replaced identities. Those who went too far were not consumed. They were resolved, smoothed into versions that fit better, hurt less, questioned nothing. The building absorbed what was sharp, difficult, unfinished. What came back walked and spoke and slept. But it no longer belonged to the past. Late that night, Mrs. Calder stood alone at the edge of the staircase. The air around it hummed softly, expectant. She could feel the pull, not urgent, not coercive. Patient. She thought of the classroom, the hospital corridor, the memories that still burned because they mattered. I don't know which version of me would come back, she whispered. The staircase did not answer. It did not need to. Because for the first time, Mrs. Calder understood what waited at the bottom was not truth or healing or closure. It was replacement. And once you reached that point, there was no return. Only continuity. Behind her, the building shifted, quiet, attentive, ready to accommodate whatever version remained. And the staircase waited for one last descent. Chapter 10. It was never built, it was waiting. Mrs. Calder was the last one who still remembered the building as it had been. Not clearly, not reliably, but enough to know that something essential had shifted, something deeper than walls or stairwells or missing apartments. The building no longer merely responded, it anticipated. It waited. The realization came to her in pieces, the way truth often did in that place. Not as a single revelation, but as a pattern finally seen whole. She stood in the hallway one evening, staring at the staircase, and understood that it had never belonged to the building at all. The building had belonged to it. She thought back to the first day it appeared, how clean it had been, how certain. No dust, no disruption, as if it had not been constructed but revealed, as if it had always existed just beneath the surface, waiting for the correct conditions. Waiting for enough weight. Pain accumulated quietly. It always did, regret layered over regret. Memory folded in on itself, hidden away, left untouched because touching it hurt too much. The residents of the building had been careful people, private people, people who carried their damage inward and called it strength. The staircase fed on that restraint. It only appears when you're ready to remember, Mrs. Calder whispered, and the words felt less like a thought and more like something returned to her. She wasn't alone in the hallway. Lena stood a few steps away, arms wrapped tightly around herself. She looked smaller than she used to, less defined, as if pieces of her had been gently sanded down. "I don't think it's just here," Lena said quietly. Mrs. Calder nodded, no. They had begun to notice the signs elsewhere. News stories about buildings evacuated for unexplained structural shifts. Anonymous posts online describing stairwells that led nowhere, rooms that remembered too much. Always the same details. Always the same pattern. Ordinary places, ordinary people. Extraordinary restraint. The staircase did not haunt locations. It manifested where suppression reached critical mass, where too many people told themselves the same lie for too long. The building hadn't been haunted. The residents were. Thomas understood that now, too. He sat on the steps of the staircase, not descending, not retreating, just sitting, elbows on knees, eyes fixed on the dark below. "It doesn't want to hurt us," he said without turning. "It wants to finish something." "Finish what?" Lena asked. Thomas exhaled slowly. "The parts we never completed, the grief we paused, the versions of ourselves we abandoned halfway through." Mrs. Calder felt tears prick her eyes. "That's not mercy," she said. "No," Thomas agreed, "it's efficiency." The building creaked softly around them, not in warning but acknowledgement. They had stopped counting who was gone. Apartments vanished. Names slipped out of conversations. Faces blurred in memory. The building accommodated the losses seamlessly, smoothing over absence until it felt impolite to mention it. That, Mrs. Calder realized, was the staircase's greatest talent. Not terror. Normalization. She thought of Elias and felt the idea of him flicker like a weak signal. She held onto it fiercely, afraid that letting go, even for a moment, would erase him completely. "You don't have to go down," Lena said suddenly, voice trembling. "You don't owe it anything." Mrs. Calder smiled sadly. "I know," she replied. "That's the trick. It doesn't take, it waits for permission." The staircase had grown still. Not inert, not dormant. Attentive. Mrs. Calder stepped closer. The air cooled, carrying that familiar scent, damp stone, old paper, the sweetness of decay. Memories pressed at the edges of her thoughts, not forcing themselves forward, simply reminding her they existed. Classrooms, corridors, doors she hadn't opened. She could feel the shape of the next level waiting for her. She knew what it would show her. She knew what it would offer to remove. And she knew, now more than ever, that removal was not healing. "It only appears when you're ready to remember," she said again, louder this time. The staircase did not move. Behind her, the building held its breath. Mrs. Calder turned away. The moment she did, something changed. Not dramatically. No collapse. No scream of metal or stone. Just a subtle loosening like a muscle finally allowed to relax. The staircase dimmed, its edges softening, shadows retreating into themselves. It did not vanish, but it receded. The building sighed, a sound that traveled through walls and floors and settled into the bones of the place. Doors reappeared, spaces stabilized, the listening quieted. Not because the danger had passed, but because a choice had been made. The staircase would always exist, somewhere, everywhere. It was not bound to this building or these people. It did not need to be. It waited in hospitals and schools and apartment blocks, in places where pain was swallowed instead of spoken, where memory was boxed away and labeled later. It waited patiently, because eventually everyone became ready. Mrs. Calder returned to her apartment and sat at her small kitchen table as dawn crept in through the window. She did not feel lighter. She did not feel healed. But she felt present. Outside, the city woke. Inside, the building settled into a quiet that felt earned. Down the hall, the staircase remained, unchanged, unfinished, eternal. Waiting for the next place, for the next accumulation, for the moment when someone, somewhere, carried enough pain long enough for it to finally appear. Because it was never built. It was waiting.
Closing chapter.
The staircase was never a place, it was a process. Every step stripped away denial, every landing peeled back a layer of comfort until nothing remained but truth. Some people need monsters with teeth and claws to feel afraid, but the most dangerous thing is memory, when it finally refuses to stay buried. If this story unsettled you, it's because somewhere inside you, a door has already started to open. And before you go, ask yourself one question. If the staircase appeared in your building tonight, would you have the strength not to step onto it?